Local programming on KRWG Public Media made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.
This is KRWG Public Media, TV, radio, online. News that matters. Now, across the Mesilla Valley and the borderland, the stories that shape our community. From the KRWG Broadcast Center at New Mexico State University, this is Newsmakers.
Thank you for joining us for Newsmakers. I'm Casey Counts. Water in the face of severe drought and climate change is our topic. And before we introduce you to our guest, Dr. Kurt Anderson, you'll hear from him as KRWG Public Media scholar Noah Race examines the issue from the perspective of agriculture, in particular pecan farming in southern New Mexico.
Pecan orchards are a common sight in Las Cruces. Dating back to 1915, the industry has flourished in southern New Mexico. Today, southern New Mexico is home to over 51,000 acres of pecan orchards. New Mexico State University pecan expert Dr. Richard Harima says that while it may seem odd to grow in such a dry environment, New Mexico has many advantages for pecan growers that other areas do not have.
Textures of these soils are really suitable for agriculture. But then the climate, that's the other part. It may seem a little bit counterintuitive, but the low amount of rain means a couple things. One is more sunshine. And the other thing that it means is that there's less moisture and humidity that can really spread disease.
Along with these advantages, a longer growing season is also helpful for this type of crop. Once mature, pecans typically develop over the summer and are ready to harvest in the fall.
And then for most of our varieties, they will begin ripening. That means the kernel will be completely mature and the shuck, the outside of the fruit, begins to open up. We'll see that, depending on the variety, sometime in say, late October or during the month of November. And then often we'll have a freeze in southern New Mexico. We'll have a freeze sometime in the month of November, and that really marks the end of the growing season.
This annual cycle is what pecan growers follow every year. One of these local growers is Buddy Aiken, who has been growing pecans since he was young.
My dad had a small farm, and as kids we planted it. We helped him plant it, and so that was the first farm. But after college, there was not a farm to run, so I left for 2 or 3 years working on the Farm Credit Bank of Texas, and at that point, this farm came up for sale and we bought it, and I came back and started farming ever since. It was in 1992.
In 2017, the pecan harvest in New Mexico was worth about $220 million, making it the most valuable crop in the state. While Las Cruces may be a good place to grow pecans, the work is far from easy.
Well, it's a lot of hard work. It's long hours, it's weekends, it's holidays. It's very challenging in that respect. You're subject to Mother Nature. You know, at any time you could be hailed out, you could be froze out. There's just a multitude of things could happen, wind damage, a lot of different ways that you will not make money that season.
Mother Nature does not stop there. New Mexico has been in the middle of a drought for more than 20 years, making farming such a water-intensive crop difficult but also controversial. Pecan farmers cannot get all of their water from above-ground resources, so many turn to drilling underground to find new water resources there. The problem is that those resources are not infinite and need to be refilled. And how do they get refilled? Through the Rio Grande. And when it runs dry, those resources are not being refilled.
Yes, we receive a little bit of surface water, but the last several years we've been in a drought, so the surface water is minimal. So we have to supplement that with groundwater, which is extra expensive, and it is a challenge.
The important thing about groundwater is where it comes from. That's where it comes from, the river. Down here, the Rio Grande River is essentially the only source of putting water back in the ground.
Dr. Kurt Anderson is a supervisor of the Doña Soil and Water Conservation District. After years of watching the water levels in the state, he has concerns on the future of agriculture.
Agriculture uses about 88% of all of our water. That's surface water and groundwater. Down here, it's about the same. They use 100% of the river water. None of the river water goes to people who live along the river other than farmers.
As farmers of all crops have to rely on groundwater more and more, many experts are worried that those sources could run dry.
And if you know the depletion rate, and you know, have an idea at least of how much water is down there right now, you can figure out when it's going to go dry. Basically in 2067, give or take 5 or 6 years, we're going to be out of water.
With these concerns, some may point their finger at pecan farmers, since pecan orchards require a lot of water. However, pecan farmers like Buddy Aiken say that pinning the blame solely on pecan farmers is far from fair.
It's incorrect thought pattern. As I just said, groundwater is very expensive. So the pecans do take a fair amount of water, but we are very efficient with the water and very diligent with it. We laser our fields, we push large volume of water so we can water fast. You know, some people that just have the water in their yards or whatever, they'll fill it up where it looks like a swimming pool, and that's not efficient at all. I mean, farmers have come a long ways.
Somewhere between a quarter to a third of an inch of water per day is what a mature orchard might require. Which is actually quite similar to a lot of other crops when the canopy is complete. It's really not quite as different as some people think it is.
As the drought continues, many issues still face the pecan industry, and with groundwater levels decreasing, pecan farmers are in a tough spot. With family farms on the line, many have much at stake. For KRWG Public Media, this is No Erase.
Dr. Kurt Anderson, Supervisor with the Doña Soil and Water Conservation District, joins us now to give us a more in-depth understanding of the challenges that lie ahead. Welcome to KRWG, Dr. Anderson.
Good evening.
It was quite the image seeing you next to the dry riverbed saying, "This is where our water comes from." Obviously, it's no secret that we've been in a mega drought for quite some time now, and we were talking with a pecan farmer there, and so that's where I'd like to begin with agricultural use. Where are we in southern New Mexico in terms of our agricultural use of water, and where should we be?
I think we're in deep trouble. More than 80% of our water use down here goes to agriculture. Essentially 100% of the water of the Rio Grande that makes its way down here goes to agriculture. But given the drought, agriculture has been pumping water out of the ground, and right now we're pumping more water than we're getting from the river.
We heard the farmer talk about that,
Yes.
and obviously that's not what their first choice is, because it's a very expensive process for them, and we must acknowledge that we all need to eat. But are there better ways to do it, Dr. Anderson?
I don't know. I think the real problem is we need more water, and either that or we're going to have to cut very far back on the type of agriculture we do. Pecans and alfalfa are the two biggest crops in New Mexico, and they are also the two thirstiest crops in terms of the amount of water per acre required to get a crop. There are less water hungry crops. I mean, you can grow grapes, cotton, and there are other things.
We grow quite a few
Yes.
grapes in New Mexico.
Yes.
And there's some new crops in our state in recent years. First hemp, now cannabis.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on those two crops?
I think there's going to be a big demand for water for cannabis, and it's not as thirsty as alfalfa or pecans, but we don't eat it, at least. Most of us don't. In point of fact, most of our pecans wind up going to China anyway. But the problem is when we have a lengthy drought, the question of who's going to get the water becomes more and more important, because we're pumping water out of the aquifer underground faster than it's going back in. It's like having a bank account. If withdrawals exceed your deposits, after a while you get into trouble. There's no more money to be pulled out. And we're getting there with respect to water.
And we've been getting a pay cut over the last
Yes.
more than a decade now as well, on top of that. So that's a picture of what's happening in agriculture. Let's talk a little bit about what's happening in industrial use.
Okay. Well, of course, the biggest use other than agriculture around here is, in fact, domestic water use. The city of Las Cruces is a major pumper of water. There are various private and mutual domestic water companies that pump water out of the ground. And what basically the situation is, there are more water rights out there than there is water to supply them all. And the net result is, I think the growth of the city of Las Cruces is going to be limited by water availability. It's the sort of thing that's already happening in parts of Arizona and California.
When we talk about urban use and personal use, let's bring it right down to our own homes. What advice do you have for people in terms of using water responsibly?
The in the city of Las Cruces, roughly half of the water that goes to a household or a house actually goes to lawns and gardens and things of that sort. I live outside of town, but it's true for me also. In the case of residents of the city, the water that goes into the house, most of it winds up in the sewer system, where it gets treated and put back in the river. Where I live, outside of the city, it goes into a septic tank, the municipal water use. That at least goes back into the ground eventually. But the basic problem is that we have to cut back on our water use very severely, but you can cut back all you like in the cities of Las Cruces and Albuquerque and El Paso. All of those cities are actually using less water in recent years than in the past, even though they've grown.
That's encouraging.
We have odd even watering days, and in some places, some parts of the world, you're not allowed to water your lawns anymore. But the problem is that no matter how far you cut back on municipal water use, domestic water use, it's only 10 or so % of our total water use. The rest is agriculture.
And industrial use for our region is not quite as dramatic.
Not terribly too much.
Would you consider the oil and gas industry to be in that category?
Not locally, out to the southeast in the Permian Basin, of course. The oil and gas industry does in fact use groundwater. They're having a drought there too, different aquifer, but a drought. What they're doing nowadays is they're using less and less of that water for their purposes. More and more, they're using what's called produced water. For every barrel of oil that comes out of a well, there are anywhere from 4 to 10 barrels of water. It's pretty nasty water. It's full of all sorts of unpleasant things, mainly salts. But they're using that water, they're pumping it back down underground. In some places, just in disposal wells. Nowadays, more and more of it is going back into fracking, the water they pump down to get the oil and gas to come up. The problem with disposal wells nowadays is they cause earthquakes. So that's been a problem. Oklahoma is now the earthquake capital of the country.
There was one that shook our region, I want to say it was just about March of 2020.
Yeah, well, it's so far in New Mexico, it's not been a major problem, but it's starting to happen. In some places like Oklahoma, it's, as I say, it's now surpassed California in terms of earthquakes.
Now let's talk about residents along the valley who have been dependent on well water. I know that for quite some time now, folks have been having to dig deeper and deeper to find water. No surprise there. What is the prospect for folks who are living on well water?
Not good, in the sense that if you've got a very deep well, and city wells and the like are pretty deep, you've got some margin of safety. If you've got a shallow well, what people are noticing, their water levels are dropping in the wells. And we have occasionally people come to Doña and water, said, hey, my well just ran dry, can you supply me with water? And that's sometimes possible, sometimes not.
We spoke not too terribly long ago with Agriculture Secretary Jeff Whitty. One of the things he mentioned about pecan farming is that the water used to irrigate pecan trees is going back into the groundwater. What does that amount to in terms of?
Most of the water that's put out on a pecan field goes up in the air from the trees. It's transpiration, okay? A little bit of it does in fact go back to the groundwater, but for instance, when we flood irrigate around here, most of the water that gets past the roots actually goes into side channels where it goes back into the river down to El Paso. El Paso County Water Improvement District number 1 is our Elephant Butte irrigation district down there. And some goes to Mexico.
Well, let's talk about that. The river flowing through New Mexico,
Yes.
down into Texas, and Mexico, obviously. And the current case before the Supreme Court, Texas sued New Mexico, and it's over agricultural use. I know that there aren't a lot of details coming out in terms of the deal that's in the works. But what can you tell us about what should be happening?
What should be happening? Okay, the basic problem, the claim of Texas, is most of the water that goes into our aquifer, okay, comes from the river. Okay. As a matter of fact, most of it comes from the delivery channels when we irrigate. Okay. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your point of view, groups like Elephant Butte Irrigation District are replacing these channels with pipes and other things, cutting off the supply that goes down. Okay. But in addition to that, because of the drought, even when there is water flowing in the river, what happens is normally that would raise the water table surrounding it, and that water, some of that water flows back into the river. And Texas basically claims, I think correctly, that New Mexico, southern New Mexico, has been pumping the water out of the ground that ordinarily would go back into the river. As a result, when they release the water up from Elephant Butte Reservoir, the fraction that's supposed to go to Texas and Mexico doesn't make it there.
So, any idea how this will get settled?
Some years ago, Texas was very unhappy, and they were talking about everyone was talking lawsuits. The irrigators, Elephant Butte Irrigation District, not the state of New Mexico, the irrigation district, and El Paso Irrigation District, and the Bureau of Reclamation, which is kind of responsible for the whole thing, including getting Mexico's share, came together. They came to a deal, and it basically, it's very complicated, but it basically amounts to this. Okay, a certain amount of water gets released from Elephant Butte Irrigation District. Okay, Caballo actually. El Paso gets its allocation, its fair allocation, which is supposed to be 43%. Mexico gets its allocation, which is supposed to be 6,000 acre feet a year. And New Mexico kind of gets as much of its allocation as is left over. Okay, that's kind of the deal. I expect we're going to go back to something like that. The scary part is that as a part of that deal, Texas agreed not to make a claim for all the water that New Mexico had stolen over previous years. Well, what happened was our state engineer and our state attorney general, who was about to run for governor, decided, no, that's not fair. New Mexico's not getting its full 57%. By God, we're going to sue. And Texas said, you don't want to do that because you'll see us in court, Supreme Court. They're bluffing. They weren't bluffing. We sued. There was a court decision that sort of went in our favor, sort of, and Texas sued back, and here we are. And that's been many years now since that's been going before the courts.
And it's often characterized as a lawsuit that started with Texas.
Well, Texas was the one who initiated the Supreme Court case for the simple reason that it involved Colorado, and New Mexico as well as Texas. And it's an interstate thing at that point. It wasn't just agreement between irrigation districts.
I know there's maybe some distance to go yet on that.
Well, you know, as soon as you start getting politicians and lawyers involved, life gets interesting.
Well,
right?
you mentioned something interesting in Noah's piece that we saw at the beginning of the program, and that was that you think más o menos we're looking at 2067 as the time that we're going to run out of water.
Groundwater. Yes, if things don't change, assuming the drought doesn't get much better, in other words, go away, assuming things continue more or less the way they are, one can do the arithmetic. One can estimate pretty accurately how much water goes in when they do run the river. You can measure, it's recorded, how much is pumped out, and you know pretty accurately how much is down there right now today in terms of potable, usable water. And
well, that's 45 years. So we've got 45 years.
About that, yeah.
How
50.
How important do you think desalination will be for our water future?
I think for domestic use, it's the only way to go. There's only a certain amount of potable water down there, but there's a lot of brackish water. It's too salty to drink or pour on your fields, on crops, but it's there and there's a lot of it, and the desalination process works. It's more expensive than pumping fresh water, but you know, the K. Bailey Hutchinson plant in El Paso is the biggest desal plant in the internal United States, and I think it's designed to produce something like 30,000 acre-feet a year of water, which would be enough to supply Las Cruces. You know.
And with climate change, I don't think we can necessarily expect there to be a quick turnaround in terms of our drought situation.
No.
And beyond that, we just marked 8 billion people
Yes.
on planet Earth.
Yeah.
So how hopeful are you that we're going to get this figured out?
I think we're in for some very rough times because, you know, the global warming, climate change, whatever you want to call it, is here, and I think it's here to stay for a long time. The long-term forecasts are, you know, end of the century. Yeah, and beyond then, of course, it gets harder and harder to predict or forecast. It's like forecasting the weather, only more so. 8 billion people, and the forecast is also that by the end of the century there will be 10 billion of us. Too many people, not enough energy to feed all these people.
Well, now they're making meat in a lab, so
Yes.
maybe we
Yes.
can produce water that way someday too.
Well, actually making meat in a lab uses lots of water.
Oh no.
Okay. You know, for instance, right now there's this big talk about a hydrogen hub. They're going to make a big attempt to manufacture hydrogen from methane and other things. That uses an incredible amount of water.
Well, Dr. Anderson, I know that's on hold for now, and so we are out of time.
Okay.
But thank you so much for coming in
Well.
and sharing your thoughts with us.
I think we're rapidly running out of time on the waterfront as well.
All right.
Okay.
We're going to close the program with Community Connections. In this episode, we learn about Southern New Mexico Trail Alliance, a group that helps the rest of us have a pleasant day while we enjoy a hike in our arid desert climate by caring for the trails we use, including keeping those very drought-tolerant pokey plants at bay.
Southern New Mexico Trail Alliance was formed in 2014 by just local trail users, hikers, trail runners, mountain bikers, mostly just to be a voice for the non-motorized trail users here in Las Cruces, Doña County, Southern New Mexico, and just be able to be an organized body to come out and represent the trails, be a voice for the trails, give back with trail maintenance and other trail-related events. We have a little bit of a flipped season from a lot of trail work. So we work from fall to spring because down here in southern New Mexico, the summer's typically a little too warm for doing this type of work, and the winters are so pleasant. So throughout that season, we typically do about monthly trail days across different trails around Las Cruces and the Doña County, mostly on public lands and in the National Monument. Majority of the work that we do on these half-day trail maintenance days, they call it like general maintenance. So that we're mostly addressing brush that's overgrowing, vegetation that's overgrowing the trail, clipping that back, so it doesn't interfere with your travel, and out here so it doesn't scratch you up or puncture your tire. We have a lot of pokey plants. And then we do address a lot of drainage issues to reduce the erosion on the trail.
I do trail work as part of my regular job as a ranger, but also whenever the Trail Alliance is out doing work, I come out and help them also. It's important for the BLM, the Bureau of Land Management, to have a presence out here with the Trail Alliance, so make sure that the type of work that they're doing is the work that should be done and done properly. It's good to be out here with them, and like I say, it's a partnership, and they take really. They're good stewards of the land, and so it's great to be out here, side by side with them. We're so fortunate to live in an area where there is so much public land and such easy access to the land. And when you come out, just appreciate how great it is to be able to come out here and enjoy this and take care of it.
Please enjoy our trails, responsibly, take care of them, and have a good time out here. And that's what they're here for. We're always welcoming in any new members or any ideas if you want to get involved. Please contact the Southern New Mexico Trail Alliance. We're Facebook, Instagram. We have a website, which is just the acronym snmta.org.
That's our time for now. Join us this week on KRWG Radio. Every weekday, it's Morning Edition from 5 a.m. to 9, Fresh Air at 11, followed by Here and Now from noon to 2, and All Things Considered 4 to 7 p.m. KRWG News is always online at krwg.org, and we'd like to hear from you. Email us with story ideas and video submissions. The address is feedback@nmsu.edu. For all of us at KRWG News, I'm Casey Counts. Have a great week. We'll see you next time on Newsmakers.